What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and in today's episode of the Fighting Game Tutorial Series, we are going to be going over currency. So we created a store widget, which we can fully navigate now, and figure out what item we're on, move between them, and eventually buy them. But to buy them, we're going to need some form of currency to do that. And so right now I've added a tracker, or a counter, with a little coin symbol, to determine how much of the currency that we currently have. And then, of course, we can add rates or amounts that are required to buy each item in the store. And if we have enough, we will purchase it. So this episode is all about currency. And so by default, I have added a flat rate that gets added to the player after they win a match. So let's assume that the player on the left is player one, because that's what they are. But we're going to assume that that's pretty much always what they are. So right now, we are looking to get player one some currency since they're the one that enters the store. So I'm going to mash my attacks. I guess I could do some cooler attacks as well. Alright, so here we go. Here is the ending screen. And you can see that there is a 20 here. And that is just indicating to me that I've gained 20 currency. Now that is just an arbitrary value. I'm going to show you how I set this up and how I got this value here. It is reading from an actual value. But it's not dynamic, doesn't change based on how well you do or something like that. Now I'm going to return to my main menu. I'm going to go into my store, and you can see now the value has updated. I have 20 of this in-game currency. So we don't have saving yet, so when I close, we will restart and be at 0 currency again. But we're going to go over the initial logic for actually gaining currency and thus eventually being able to buy things from the store. With all that said, I want to give a huge shout out to my YouTube membership and Patreon members and supporters. Thank you guys for all the love and support, for the great idea of this episode and the store system as a whole. Really appreciate it. Always excited to see what you guys are working on, so thank you again. For those of you that want to get caught up in this series and check out everything we've done, I'll go ahead and link the playlist right here in the top right corner. So that is every Fighting Game Tutorial Series episode. You can see every mechanic that we've made and everything we've done to get to this point. Alternatively, if you just care about the currency and the shop system, I'll link you to the first episode of the in-game shop and in-game store right here in the top right corner. With all that said, we can go ahead and get started. So this is a C++ and Blueprint tutorial, so we're going to need both today. I'm going to go into my code to start, and there's not a lot we have to do in here. We just have to set up some fundamental variables and logic. That way we can actually create a currency tracker and then update it when we want to. A good place for this is in our base game instance. So our base game instance persists between levels, and we can also use it to save data out using a save game object or our own method of saving data. Regardless of the method we use, the base game instance is perfect since we don't have to save it every time we go from a menu or a different stage. It just keeps track of this value while the game is open, then we can save it out and load from it later. So in my base game instance, I've made a new variable that is an integer that I've called total currency, and is the amount of currency the main player has at the time. I specify the main player because right now I only have one currency, player one. Currency should probably be tied to a player's profile, and you might be able to sign in multiple profiles in your game. So if that's the case, you'll have to keep track of the currency that each player has. But for now, in this local game, we're going to assume that there is one player that has currency, and that is the main player. So, int total currency, and I made a new property that is edit anywhere, blueprint read write, with a category of profile, because we will be updating it to be included in profiles later in the future. Now this is actually all we have to do in our base game instance.h, but let's go to the base game instance.cpp, and let's make sure we set the value to a default. I'm going to default it to 0, because when we start out, we don't want to have any currency on the player. They have 0 currency currently. Let's go to our fighter template game mode.h, and let's figure out how much currency should be added and when. Right now, like I said, it's an arbitrary value, but we are going to actually implement a method of determining how much currency a player should receive at each match or each game mode or whatever it is, whenever you want to add it. So I've added an integer to the fighter template game mode called currency to give, that is an integer. And as the comment says, it is the amount of currency to give to one or more fighters based on performance, match type, etc. So if you're doing online play, maybe you give more currency than if you're just spending time in practice mode. Like I said, it is an integer. It matches our total currency type, and it is also a U property, edit anywhere, blueprint read write, and the category is currency. So this can be updated freely, and once we come about the final value of this variable, we can then add it to the base game instance's total currency so that the player's currency is accurately updated based on what they should have received from that match or that fight or that mini game or whatever it may be. Now let's go to the fighter template game mode.cpp and let's make sure we set a default value here. Now this could be 0 because you'll want to calculate it as the fight goes on, but I'm going to have a separate episode on that because we can do a lot with that. We can do it based off of highest combo, we can do it based off of what game mode it is or what match type it is, and so we may want to update it later in the future. There's a lot we can do with it. For now, I'm going to give it a default value of 20. That way we can just automatically give 20 currency to the player when we decide to do so. An additional thing that's not related to currency at all, but I realized that I never put num hit stop frames from the game mode in the constructor, so I never gave it a default value. Technically it does default to 0, but I recommend going and putting it in here since I've done that with the rest of my variables. So my apologies for the mistake, but if you are following the series from the beginning, go ahead and update that now if you haven't already. Now, I decide to give the currency to the player once the match has been won. You can give this whenever you want, but if you want to match what I have, I'm scrolling down to my match 1 function that I have in my game mode, and all this logic was already in here. Once a player reaches the required round wins to win the match, then we call this match 1 function. And so we've done all this stuff in here before, but now I'm adding something new in here, and I'm going to grab the base game instance and I'm actually going to update the currency that they have with the currency that this game mode dictates that we should give. So we've done this plenty of times before, but we're going to do auto base game instance. And basically, we're going to grab our game instance, and if we can't cast it to our base game instance type, this if statement will fail, and then we won't do this. But if we can, this cast will succeed and set this variable equal to that result. From there, we'll be able to grab any variables from that object, and so we can grab our total currency variable that we made earlier in the episode, and then we can add the currency to give to it. So if we can get the base game instance, grab the total currency, and then do plus equals currency to give, so update the already existing value by adding this new value to it. Now, you may need to add the base game instance as an include at the top of your fighter template game mode. I did not have it prior, so I had to so that I could access the base game instance type. You may have had to add it in an earlier episode for other reasons, so feel free to skip this if you already have it. But if you don't have it, make sure to include your base game instance.h in your fighter template game mode.cpp. At this point, we can go into the editor. We've done everything we have to do in the code for today. Now, in the editor, I would recommend making a widget that we can use and spawn freely for our currency. So I've made 2 widgets, currency details and currency gained. So let me open both of these up. Now, to make a widget, you just go to add new, user interface, and widget blueprint. Then you call it whatever you want. You don't have to match my names. This is just what I have. So I have currency details and currency gained. Right now, they're pretty much exactly the same, but there is a small difference, and there's going to be more differences in the future. So currency details is just a widget that has a canvas and an image and some text. And basically, we are going to display to the user how much currency they currently have. Now, the reason I made this its own widget, because it's not required that you do this, is because I may want to use this in multiple widgets. I may want to show how much currency the player has at multiple times on my menus. Could use it 3, 4, 10 times, it doesn't matter. But I'm probably going to use it more than once. Right now I'm only using it in the shop. Again, it's this widget right here in the top right corner of the shop. So you could just add it directly on your store widget. But I decided to make a widget out of it and then put this widget on my store widget instead of just adding the individual image and text. Now the currency gained is slightly different because it has the coin image and it has text, but this text is representing not our total currency, but how much currency we earned from the match. This is another thing that I may want to show on different widgets or different parts of the game. Right now I'm only putting it in my versus end pop-up, but you could put it in many spots. Now to quickly go over each of these, I am still in Unreal Engine 4, but it doesn't matter if you're in Unreal Engine 4 or Unreal Engine 5, the process will be the same. If you're in Unreal Engine 5, you won't start with a canvas panel, but you can easily add one. You can simply search canvas panel and drag it into the widget. Or if you're in Unreal Engine 4 like me, you already have one. And all I do is I add an image, which is in common, but you can search for it as well. Add that to the canvas panel, and then I have text that I add to the canvas panel. Now for my image, I'll show you what I've got. So I have an actual currency icon that I've added to the game. To add an image to the game, you can simply drag it into the project files, and it will import as a texture. So this is my image that I made custom for the currency in the game. So I clicked on my image, I called it currency image, and I made it a variable. It's not required that you use a variable here. You'll see that I don't actually use it at all. But it is a variable in case I need to update it in the future, such as making different currency images and updating that based on the unit that I have, or if I want to have multiple types of currency in my game. I could have one that is for buying items in the shop, and I could have one that is for leveling up characters, even though it's not really a currency in terms of real life standards. It could be a currency like level up power. That is technically a currency. You're still spending something to get something in return. So it's a variable, but it doesn't have to be. That's up to you. Size to content, just because I wanted this to be the appropriate size that I assigned here, 64 by 64. You don't have to use that size. If I don't do this, then it is a little squished and a little strange just because of the size of my image, because it was initially much bigger than that. So I'm just having these options selected because it looks the best for me. You choose what is best for you. Really, you don't have to do anything with this except set the brush, set the image to be the correct icon. Now for the text, I called it currency amount text, and I've made this a variable. This one, it is important that it's a variable so that we can access it. Technically, you could bind it without making it a variable, but I think it is useful to be able to grab it and set it in the future. So I'd recommend leaving that there. I have moved my positions around, but again, that's just my personal preference. You don't have to do that. And I have sized the content here as well so that it's not just some huge box. It just fits exactly with what the text is. I put in a default value of 240 just because that was the first number that came to my mind, but I've also bound the text. So if you press the little drop down next to your text box, you'll be able to create a new binding. When you do that, it will create one, and it will be called something like get currency amount text _ 0. I cleaned up the name a little bit, but it's the same thing. It's called get currency amount text. Now we're going to fill this out in a second. Let's go back and make sure we have the rest of our text settings correct on here. So you can see I've set up my font as well as my outline, my justification to be the center of this text box. And there you go. Now we can go back into the graph, and let's actually go to the event graph before we go into the binding. I've gotten rid of all my other events except for event construct, and I've just set up a game instance reference because I want to grab that total currency variable that we set up in the code. So here's my event construct. All I do is get game instance and then cast it to the base game instance, which is the one that has the total currency. And then I want to set a variable called game instance reference. You won't have this, you have to make it. So you can either make a new variable here that is of type base game instance, or simply drag off the cast and promote it to a variable. When you do this, you'll get a variable that looks like this. And I just called mine game instance ref. The main reason I'm doing this is so that in the binding that we have, you'll have a starting node and a return node. The return node is text, so it is what we want that text to say. I want it to represent how much currency the character or the player currently has. So I grab my game instance reference and I get it. Then I right click on it and convert it to a validated get. This is just checking for validity. If it's not valid, we don't want to try and grab this variable because it will crash. But if it is valid, we want to grab our total currency variable off of it. And then we want to plug that into the return node. When you plug it in, it will automatically give you this toText integer node here. This just converts your integer to text that can display the text box. So you don't have to do anything special. You can also manually grab this node, toText integer, and pass that in. But it's literally that simple. Now this widget will display the total currency that we have on our user. That's everything for the currency details widget. Now, I also made this currency gained widget, as I told you, and it is basically exactly the same. So I'll quickly go through the options so you can see it, but I'm not going to cover it all again because these are the same as before. I have a canvas panel, an image, this time with a currency image, that is a variable, and then currency gained, which is text, and that is also a variable. You can see all my positions, my size to content, but you can see the text here just says plus 20, and it is not bound to anything. I'm going to update this justification, but otherwise this is all going to be the same as the other widget. Now instead I have a function that I set up to update this value. So instead of binding it to a value, I'm going to manually set it. When we know how much currency the player should gain, I'm going to set this value to represent that. But I have the currency image here just to show to the user what it is that they've gained. If you just put plus 20, that would be a little confusing for them. But seeing this icon, they know what it is that they are getting. So let's go into our graph and let's go to the event graph. You'll notice there's nothing in here. We don't need to set up any references like we did for the currency details. So you don't need anything in your event graph. Instead, I've made a function and I've called it setCurrencyGained. And in here, it's as simple as this. On the function, after you have created it, make sure you compile and save so you can add input and output parameters. We are going to add an input parameter that is an integer for the amount that we have gained. So whenever we display this widget, we should know how much the player is going to get, and we should show that to them. So make a new input parameter that is of type integer, and give it a name, such as amount gained. Now I want to take my variable of the text, which is currency gained, get it, drag off of it, and type in setText text. It is a little strange, but that is what the node is called. And basically we're going to set this text value, and we're going to set the text within it to whatever is passed into here. So what I was doing before is taking the amount gained from the function and passing it directly in, which of course converts it to that toText integer node. But I'm going to do a little something different here as well. So I'm going to do a string append, and I'm going to append the plus sign just to show that it is being added. And the thing that we are going to put in the B is the actual number being added, so it's going to show up as plus 20, not just 20. And then I'm going to take that return value from the append and pass that into the in-text. You don't have to do this, but instead of just putting 20, I like to show a plus 20. That way the user or the player knows that they are gaining that value. It's a little simpler to tell that way. Otherwise, they're just like, is that my total currency? Is that the currency that I gained from this match alone or from this set of matches? They're not going to know. So this will show that they have gained 20. And that is my currency gained widget. Now what we have to do is add these two widgets that we created to where we want to actually visualize them. So we want our store widget and we want our end of match pop-up. So let's go to the store widget right here. And you can search in the palette for other widgets that you have created. So we're going to grab our currency details widget for the first one. And you can see I've added that right here to the canvas panel. And it shows up looking like this by default. Since we did the binding for the amount in the widget itself, we don't have to do anything with it except place it here. So you can see my settings here. And it is a variable by default, but we don't actually need it to be for this episode, so it's up to you if you want to leave that or disable it. And once you've added it, you are good to go. I've also added a back button to this widget just for convenience so that you can exit out of this menu and return to the main menu for testing purposes. I would recommend that you do that. And a good way to do it is to just go to something like the credits screen. Go to the event graph and steal the exit credits logic from there. I'll go ahead and go over it again because it's very short, but if you've already implemented this, then you can simply copy it over. So inside of our store widget, if we go into our graph, we had set up logic in our event graph for the return P1 button. This is something we already did. So if we press the back button on the input device, or if we actually pressed the back button here that we added, we'll go ahead and exit from this menu. Now the back button didn't previously exist, so you can see what my back button looks like, or you can copy it from one of your other menus. It's nice because all these menus have the same formatting, so you can either copy from other ones or just set them up again. But basically I have a standard button called back button that is a variable. Here are my positions. I've set my style normal to be my button image here. And then everything else is default. I don't currently have a way to navigate to it. I'm just using the mouse because that's not what this episode is about. But if you add this in now, a little bit ahead of time, you will be able to see that your currency changes when exiting this menu and going back into it. So it's good to have the ability to exit out of it. Then I have text on this back button that just says back with these settings. Since we have the back button now, we can scroll all the way down to the bottom and override the onPressed event, which will then get you what you see here. So we already had this custom event in place on this listen for input action, and I'm also going to add the onPressed back button event here. They're going to do the same thing, and what they're going to do is play the sound effect for exiting, and by pressing that back button, exiting to the other menu. I'm going to remove from parent the current widget, which is going to remove the store widget. I'm then going to create the main menu screen widget and add that to the viewport. By the way, to get this create main menu screen widget, it is just create widget and make sure you use your main menu screen. It will change the name for you. You've probably seen all this before. You definitely have if you've been following along with the series. I just want to add that in really quickly so we can exit the store and you can test this out. Now, you can do everything you need to do with your store at this point. It should show the currency. You can exit out and go back to the main menu. And now we have to add the currency gained widget to the versus end pop-up. So I'm going to go to my versus end pop-up widget, and I'm going to look for my currency gained widget. And it is right here. So I can add this to my canvas panel, and you can see it's right here. Again, here are my settings for everything. So there you go. However, the currency gain needs a little bit more assistance than the currency details. Remember, we need to set the actual value that we gained on the widget. And to do that, we can go into the graph, and specifically, we can go to the end of event construct. When the versus end pop-up widget is created, we have won the match, or the match has ended one way or another. We are already getting a game mode reference in here, but if you're not for any reason, you can get your game mode, cast it to your default game mode BP, and set a variable to it just like we did with the base game instance earlier in the episode. I'm scrolling to the end of event construct, and I am going to use our currency gained widget, which this is a variable, and we actually need it to be a variable this time because we're going to use it. So I'm going to grab my currency gained. I'm going to drag off of it. I'm going to set currency gained, which is the function that we created in the graph here. Now going back to the versus end pop-up, I'm going to grab my game mode reference. You can check for validity if you want, although it should be valid at this point because this is the versus end pop-up. We have already finished a match, so the game mode should not be invalid at this point. Then I want to drag off and get my currency to give, which is the variable we made in the code that determines how much we're giving to the player, and we want to pass that into the amount gained. And there you go. Now, once you do this, when you play your game, I can go ahead and win a fight, and I should see that it says plus 20. And then when I go into my store, the store should say 20. If I win another fight without closing the game, then it should say plus 20 again at the end of the match. But then I should see 40 in the store. So I've just beat my opponent, and the versus end pop-up is about to be created. You can see that it says currency plus 20 right here. So now if I go down and select the main menu option, it will load me into the main menu level. I can go into my store. The store now says 20. If I play again, just to be sure that everything is working as intended, and I defeat my opponent one more time, you'll see that it will say 40. So we won our second match. The versus end pop-up is going to come up. It's going to say plus 20. We're going to go to the main menu. We're going to go to the store, and the store should say 40. That is our current total currency. At this point, we've fully implemented a basic in-game currency system, so you can actually start adding to your currency and keeping track of it. In the next episode on currency, we will go over modifying how much you get based on how you performed in a match, and we'll shortly after be going over saving that value so that next time you load into the game, you will be able to retrieve that and not lose it. So when you play between multiple sessions, your currency is saved. Anyway, guys, that's all I got for you today, so thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, please subscribe, and please consider following me on Patreon or YouTube membership. To everyone who has already followed me on there, thank you so much for the love and support. I'm so grateful, and your assistance really goes a long way and makes this series possible. So thank you so much for that. If you had any issues with this tutorial or any of my tutorials, feel free to join the Discord community. I would be happy to help you out, and it is completely free. Like I said, guys, that's all I got, so thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.